She was the kind of person most people barely noticed. Not because she lacked anything special, but because she never tried to be seen. She liked quiet corners, soft music, and staying in the background where no one asked too many questions. At work, she sat in the last row during meetings. At community events, she stood near the sidewalls, helping where she could but never stepping into the spotlight. People knew her face, but not her story. They greeted her politely, but no one imagined she carried something inside her that could change an entire room. For as long as she could remember, music had been the one thing that made her feel alive in a way nothing else did. She had learned to play from old videos and recordings, copying sounds until her hands found their own way. She played late at night when the world outside turned silent. The small lamp in her room lit just enough space for her instrument, and she played until her heart felt calm again. Music wasn't a hobby for her. It was the language she used when words weren't enough. Still, she never thought of showing her talent to anyone. It was easier to keep it hidden, like a safe place she didn't want the world to touch. Her friends sometimes asked if she had any special skills, and she always shook her head with a shy smile. When someone mentioned talent shows or performances, she would quietly laugh and change the subject. She believed performing was for people who were confident, bold, and unafraid of crowds, none of which she felt she was. Then one day everything changed because of a simple announcement. It happened during a small community gathering in the town hall. The hall was decorated with strings of lights, and people were chatting, drinking tea, and sharing stories. She had only come because her friend insisted she shouldn't spend every evening alone. She agreed reluctantly, standing off to the side with a warm cup in her hands. The organizer stepped on stage and tapped the microphone. The chatter slowly faded. He announced that the community would be hosting a large event next month, something special, something that would bring everyone together. Performance night. Music, dance, storytelling, anything that allowed people to express themselves. He said the event would be free for all and that performers could sign up starting that evening. The room buzzed with excitement. People turned to each other, already discussing what they might do. A few young people rushed toward the sign-up table right away. Her friend nudged her gently and said, "You should do it. You play so beautifully." Mahoshi shook her head quickly, almost spilling her tea. No, I can't do that. I would never be able to stand on a stage." But her friend just smiled at her, a knowing smile she had seen many times. "You don't have to be perfect," her friend whispered. "Just be you." She didn't reply. She stared at the sign-up sheet from across the room, a long list already forming. She could almost hear her heartbeat in her ears. Part of her wanted to walk away. Another part, a tiny, quiet part, felt something else. A pull. A thought she didn't dare say aloud. What if? This was her chance. She stayed until the event ended, listening to others talk excitedly about their ideas. Someone planned to sing. Another person wanted to perform a drum piece. A group discussed doing a small comedy skit. Everyone seemed so confident, so sure. She watched them with a mix of admiration and envy. On her way out of the hall, she passed by the sign-up table. There was no one around anymore. The list sat there, names written in different handwriting styles. Her hand trembled as she stopped in front of it. She told herself she was only looking. She wasn't going to do anything. She took a step back. But then another thought came, something soft, something brave. If she didn't do this now, when would she ever? Before she could talk herself out of it, she reached for the pen. Her fingers shook slightly as she wrote her name at the bottom of the list. The moment she lifted the pen away, she felt a wave of panic. What had she done? She wanted to erase it immediately, but instead she turned and walked out. Her heart racing as if she had just done something dangerous. All the way home, she questioned her decision. The cool night air brushed against her face, but it couldn't calm her worries. She imagined herself on stage, lights shining on her, people staring, waiting, judging. The thought made her stomach twist. She almost convinced herself she would call the organizers the next morning and remove her name. But when she reached home, and the quiet of her small room wrapped around her, she saw her instrument resting on its stand. Something inside her softened. She sat down, picked it up, and started to play the melody she had been practicing for months. The familiar sound filled the room like a warm blanket. She played with more emotion than usual, closing her eyes as her fingers moved across the strings. When she finished, she sat still for a long moment. And then she whispered to herself, maybe I can do this. Over the next few days, she tried to act normal, but the thought of the performance followed her everywhere. At work, she found herself drifting into daydreams, imagining different ways the event could go. In some daydreams, she played beautifully and people smiled. In others, she froze and ran off the stage. She didn't tell anyone about her sign-up, not even her family. The fear was still there, heavy and real, but behind it was something else: hope. Her routine began to change slowly. After work, instead of resting, she practiced for hours. She replayed the same sections again and again until they sounded clean and smooth. She just wanted the music to feel true. Some nights she grew frustrated, stopping and starting, only to continue again because quitting didn't feel right anymore. Her neighbor, who sometimes heard faint music through the wall, knocked on her door one evening. She opened it nervously, thinking she might have been too loud. Instead, the neighbor smiled kindly and said, "Your music makes the hallway feel calm. Keep playing." That small comment warmed her heart more than she expected. Still, she didn't feel confident. Each time she thought about the actual performance, her hands felt cold. But she kept going. Something inside her refused to let her back out now. She kept imagining the quiet moment before she began playing on stage. The silence, the weight of people waiting. It scared her, but it also excited her in a way she couldn't explain. A week later, she visited the hall again for a meeting with the event organizers. They wanted to know what each performer would be doing, how much time they needed, and if they required any special setup. She entered the hall with slow steps, looking around at the rows of empty chairs. It felt so different when no one was there. The space seemed larger, the echoes sharper. The organizer greeted her warmly, asking what she planned to perform. She explained quietly, almost afraid that saying it aloud would make it too real. But the organizer nodded with genuine interest and said, "That sounds wonderful. The audience will love it." Hearing those words felt unreal. She wasn't sure if he really meant them or if he said that to every performer, but it gave her a small push of courage. He showed her the stage, the general setup, and where she would stand. She stepped onto the stage for the first time, looking out at the empty hall. Even without anyone there, it made her heart beat faster. She imagined rows of people filling the seats. She imagined the lights, the applause, the whispers, the expectations. She swallowed hard and stepped back down, but she didn't feel like running. She felt something else, like she was at the beginning of something she had needed for a long time. From that day on, she practiced with more emotion. She wasn't just playing notes anymore. She was playing her story, her fears, her hopes. She played as if the future version of her was standing in the doorway, watching and cheering her on. On some nights, doubt returned. She would sit with her hands resting on her lap, staring at her instrument while thoughts raced through her mind. What if they laugh? What if I make mistakes? What if I embarrass myself? But then, another voice, softer but steadier, answered, "What if you shine? What if this is the moment you were waiting for?" She didn't know which voice would win on the night of the performance, but she kept going. Day after day, night after night. She slowly started to see small changes in herself. Her hands shook less, her breathing steadied. Her confidence grew, not loudly but quietly, like a flame she protected with both hands. One evening, her friend visited her unexpectedly. She heard the gentle knock and opened the door, surprised. Her friend stepped in and said, "You've been different lately. Happier, braver. I'm proud of you, you know." She didn't know how to reply, but the warmth of those words filled her chest. Her friend asked her to play something. Normally she would refuse, but this time she nodded. She played the piece she had been practicing for the event. As she played, her friend sat silently, listening with wide eyes. When she finished, her friend exhaled, as if they had been holding their breath. "People need to hear this," her friend whispered. Those words stayed with her long after the night ended, as the performance day drew closer. The excitement in the community grew. Posters went up around town. People talked about the event, everywhere, at shops, in parks, in small cafes. She heard children talking about who they thought would be the best performer. Someone mentioned that a group was planning a big dance routine. Another said a singer from a nearby town would also join. No one knew about her. No one talked about her performance. And strangely, that made her feel both relieved and determined. She didn't want the pressure. She wanted the surprise. On the night before the event, she sat in her room with her instrument resting in her hands. The room felt quieter than usual. She played softly, letting the music tell her story one more time. She felt nervous, but she also felt ready. For the first time in her life, she wasn't hiding. She was stepping forward. And although she didn't know what tomorrow would bring, deep inside her heart, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Days that followed felt heavier and busier than she expected. Every morning, she woke up with the same thought in her mind. The performance night was coming closer. It wasn't just a distant idea anymore. It was a date on the calendar, each day marking one step closer. And no matter how much she tried to distract herself, the thought stayed with her like a quiet shadow. She still went to work like always, greeting the same people, doing the same tasks, smiling politely when someone asked how she was. On the outside, her routine looked unchanged, but inside, everything felt different. There was a soft pressure sitting in her chest, reminding her that she had taken a step she had never taken before. And every day, that step seemed to get bigger. After work, she returned home and practiced again. The soft glow from her lamp reflected off the polished surface of her instrument. She sat in the same corner she had always practiced in, yet it didn't feel the same now. It felt like a space preparing her, a space pushing her forward even when she felt scared. Some nights she played beautifully. Her hands moved with ease, her heart steady, her breath calm. On those nights, she felt hopeful. She thought maybe she could truly stand in front of people and perform without falling apart. But other nights were different. Sometimes her fingers slipped. Sometimes she lost her rhythm or forgot a section she had played perfectly 100 times before. Those nights left her frustrated, sitting still with her head lowered, whispering to herself, "Maybe I'm not ready." Still, she didn't stop. Even when she felt discouraged, she picked up her instrument again. It became her way of saying she wasn't giving up. One evening, after a long and tiring day, she sat down to practice, but couldn't play more than a few notes. Her hands felt stiff. Her mind felt too crowded. She sighed and placed her instrument down. Rubbing her eyes, she didn't hear her friend come in until she felt a light tap on her shoulder. Her friend had a spare key and often checked on her when she seemed overwhelmed. "You look tired?" her friend said softly. She nodded. I don't know if I can really do this." Her friend sat beside her. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be brave. And brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It just means you keep going even when you are." Hearing those words made her eyes sting slightly. Not because she was sad, because someone believed in her more than she believed in herself. Her friend gently pushed her instrument closer. "Play something. Not for the show. Just for me. Just for yourself." She hesitated, then picked it up again. And slowly she started to play. Her hands felt unsure at first, but as the music filled the quiet room, her breathing eased. Her friend closed their eyes, listening, smiling softly. When she finished, her friend whispered, "That's why you have to perform. People deserve to hear this." Her heart warmed, and the tension she carried all day slowly loosened. The next morning, she woke up feeling lighter. The fear didn't disappear, but it didn't control her either. She felt like she could breathe again. As the performance day drew closer, the organizers scheduled a group rehearsal so performers could become familiar with the stage setup. She wasn't required to perform her whole piece, just test the space, sound, and order. When she arrived at the hall, she saw several performers she had seen around town. Some were chatting excitedly. A group practiced dance moves in the corner. A boy tuned his guitar. Others rehearsed lines for a skit. She stood near the back, holding her instrument case close to her chest, unsure if she belonged there. But then she noticed something. Everyone looked nervous. Even the confident ones. Even the loud ones. Their eyes carried the same mix of excitement and fear she felt. The organizer spotted her and waved. "You made it. Go ahead, set your instrument there. We'll test your sound after the group in front of you." She nodded and walked toward the stage. Her hands trembled as she opened the case. She touched her instrument gently, as if it were the only thing grounding her. When her turn came, she stepped onto the stage. She could feel the wooden surface under her shoes. She could see rows of empty seats stretched out in front of her. The hall felt so big, so wide, even with no audience. She adjusted her instrument. The organizer tested the microphone placement and sound levels. When he signaled, she played a few notes. The sound echoed through the hall, soft and warm. That echo surprised her. She had never heard herself like this before. The hall carried her music differently. It made every note feel bigger, deeper, fuller. The organizer smiled. "Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. You'll be great." Hearing that from someone who didn't know her personally made her shoulders loosen a little. When she stepped off stage, she noticed a few performers looking at her with curious expressions. One of them said, "Hey, you sounded nice. Can't wait to hear your full performance." She didn't know how to respond except with a shy smile and a quiet thank you. It felt strange being noticed in a room full of talent. Strange, but not unpleasant. Over the next few days, she practiced not just the music, but the feeling she wanted to carry on stage. She practiced breathing slowly. She practiced standing tall. She practiced imagining a room full of people but no judgmently warmth. Still, doubt came back in waves. What if she messed up? What if people whispered about her? What if she froze? But each time those thoughts came, she told herself something her friend had said. Brave means you go even when you're scared. 3 days before the event, she attended another rehearsal. This one was optional, but she felt she needed it. When she entered the hall, she found only a few people practicing. The stage lights were on. Casting gentle beams across the floor, she placed her instrument on a chair and sat down, looking at the stage. Just looking at it made her heart speed up. The organizer approached her again. "Want to try another run?" She nodded. When she stepped onto the stage this time, she felt slightly more comfortable than before. She wasn't shaking as much. Her hands were warm instead of cold. She began to play. Not loudly, not perfectly, but honestly. She played the notes she knew so well. The music rose through the hall again. This time, 1 or 2 performers sat quietly to listen. When she finished, the organizer clapped softly. "You're improving each day. Keep going." The performer sitting nearby also smiled and said, "You're really good." "I didn't expect that." She felt her cheeks grow warm, but in a good way. That night, she walked home slowly, listening to the evening sounds around her. The wind rustled through trees. Cars passed quietly. Somewhere, a child laughed. Everything felt gentle. She whispered to herself, "Maybe I really can do this." The night before the performance arrived, she couldn't sleep much. She kept turning, adjusting her pillow, getting up for water, then lying back down again. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined the hall filled with people. The lights. The silence before she played. It was both exciting and terrifying. She finally got up and sat near her window. The street outside was calm, washed in soft orange streetlight. She rested her chin on her knees and breathed slowly. After a few minutes, she picked up her instrument once again. She didn't practice the full piece. She played only a few soft notes, letting the sound remind her why she was doing this in the first place. She wasn't performing to impress people. She wasn't doing it to be famous or praised. She was doing it because she had spent her whole life hiding her voice, hiding her talent, hiding her heart. This performance was her way of stepping out, of finally letting herself be seen. She placed the instrument down gently and went back to bed. Her eyes slowly closed, and this time, sleep finally found her. When morning came, she felt a mix of fear and calm. She ate a light breakfast, though she barely tasted it. She checked her instrument case twice. Making sure everything was in place, her friend arrived and offered her a ride to the hall. They sat together in comfortable silence. Her friend didn't give her any long speeches or overwhelming encouragement, just a simple, warm presence. That was enough. When they reached the hall, she stepped out and looked at the building. People were already gathering outside, chatting, laughing, holding tickets. Excited for the evening, she whispered to herself, "This is it." Inside, performers were preparing backstage. Some paced nervously. Some stretched or warmed up their voices. Some whispered rehearsed lines. She found a spot in the corner and sat with her instrument in her lap. Her heart beat fast, but her hands stayed steady. The organizer walked by, giving reassuring nods to everyone. When he saw her, he smiled warmly. "You're going to do wonderful. Just remember, play from the heart." She nodded, breathing deeply. As she prepared, she heard the sound of people filling the audience seats, the low hum of conversations, the rustle of programs. The excitement growing, she closed her eyes. The next time she opened them, she would be one step closer to stepping on that stage. And for the first time, she didn't feel like running away. She felt ready to face whatever happened. Because even if her hands shook, even if she made mistakes, she had promised herself one thing: she would show up, and that alone made her stronger than she had ever been before. The hall was already buzzing with excitement by the time she stepped backstage. She felt the energy of the audience, even though she hadn't seen them yet. Their voices rose and fell like a soft wave, some laughing, some greeting friends, some rereading the event program with curiosity. She could almost picture the filled seats, the bright lights, the restless movement of people settling in. She stood quietly near the curtain, holding her instrument case close. Her heart beat fast but steady. She had imagined this moment so many times in the last few weeks, but imagining it and living it were completely different. Performers around her rushed about. Some stretched their arms, some tuned instruments, and some whispered lines to themselves. A few paced in nervous circles, while others stood confidently with wide smiles. She blended into the background as she always did, but this time she wasn't just watching, she was waiting for her turn. A young dancer practiced a few last-minute steps near her, her shoes tapping softly against the floor. The dancer noticed her watching and offered a warm smile. "You ready?" she asked, her voice friendly. She nodded gently. "Trying to be." "That's all you need," dancer replied, before returning to her stretching. The organizer entered the backstage area and clapped his hands together. "Everyone's attention. All right, everyone. We're starting in 10 minutes. Take deep breaths. Trust your practice. Remember, this night is about sharing what you love, not perfection, sharing." His words calmed some of the tension in the air. People nodded. Some closed their eyes. Some whispered encouragements to each other. She took a deep breath and reminded herself why she had signed up to stop hiding, to finally let her music breathe in the open air. The lights dimmed in the hall. She heard the shift in the audience as they settled down, the sound of programs being folded, the expectant silence rising. The host stepped out on stage, and she listened to his voice echo through the hall. "Welcome, everyone, to our community performance night. Tonight, you'll see talent from neighbors, friends, and familiar faces you might pass every day. Let's begin with our first performer." A burst of applause followed. She peeked slightly through a gap in the curtain to see the stage. A young boy walked out with a guitar, nervous but smiling. He played a soft tune that drew warm applause from the audience. Then a comedy duo performed, making people laugh loudly. After them came a singer with a deep, calming voice. She watched each performance closely. It's not as competition, but as proof that courage came in many forms. Every performer looked scared in their own way, yet they went out there anyway. Her turn was getting closer. She could feel it. The organizer finally approached her with a gentle nod. "You're next after the group dance. Take your position backstage." Her pulse quickened. She opened her instrument case and lifted her instrument with careful hands, as if holding a fragile memory. She checked it one last time, making sure everything felt right. As the group dance ended and the crowd cheered loudly, she stepped toward the shadowed side of the stage. Her breath shortened for a moment, and she felt her hands tremble. She whispered to herself, "Just breathe." The host walked out again, smiling brightly under the stage lights. "And now, we have a quiet but very special performer. Please give a warm welcome." Her heart nearly stopped. This was it. She stepped out slowly, her shoes touching the wooden floor of the stage. The lights felt warm on her face. For a brief second, she wanted to run back into the darkness. But something inside her pushed her forward. The hall fell silent. She reached her place in the center of the stage. She could not see individual faces because of the lights, only outlines of people sitting, waiting, watching. Her throat tightened, her palms grew moist, adjusted her grip. Then she remembered her friend's words. Brave means you go even when you're scared. She took a deep breath and lifted her instrument. The first note came out soft, trembling slightly like a small bird testing its wings. She felt her chest tighten, but she kept going. The second note was clearer. The third steadier slowly. Her hands remembered what her mind had forgotten in fear. Her fingers moved more confidently. Sound grew fuller, richer. The hall stayed quiet, but not a cold silence, an attentive one. People leaned forward. She could feel it. As she continued, the music carried her away from the fear, took her back to her room, to the late nights she practiced when no one was watching. It took her back to the hallway where her neighbors said her music calmed them. It took her back to her friend's soft encouragement. For the first time, she wasn't thinking about the audience. She wasn't thinking about mistakes. She was simply playing. She closed her eyes and let the melody guide her. Note echoed. Across the hall, filling the space with emotion she never said out loud. Memories, dreams, fears, hopes, all of it blended into the music. She reached a gentle pause in the piece and opened her eyes. The hall remained still. No whispers, no shifting noises, just silence. A respectful, almost breathless silence. She continued playing, letting her hands speak the language she had kept hidden for so long. And as the final chorus arrived, she felt something shift inside her, a sense of belonging she had never felt before. Then as she approached the final note, she slowed down, letting the sound linger a moment longer. She ended the piece with a soft, drawn-out tone that floated through the hall like a feather. The silence that followed felt unreal. For a brief, terrifying second, she wondered if something was wrong. Had she done something unexpected? Had she disappointed them? But then, like a wave breaking, the applause erupted. It wasn't polite or small, it was loud, full, rising through the hall with strength. People stood. She saw their silhouettes rise in the bright glare of the stage lights. She had brought them to their feet. A sound she had only dreamed of filled her ears. She had imagined applause before, but not like this, not warm, not emotional, not overwhelming. Her chest tightened, but not from fear this time, from something like joy. She looked out, overwhelmed. Some people wiped their eyes. Some clapped above their heads. Others whistled and cheered. Her hand shook again. Not from panic, but from disbelief. She bowed shyly, unsure what to do with so much attention. Her cheeks felt warm. Her legs trembled slightly. The applause didn't stop. It continued rolling in waves. The sound carried through her whole body. When she stepped off stage, the organizer met her with wide eyes and a bright smile. That was amazing. Absolutely amazing. She looked down shyly, but a small smile tugged at her lips. She didn't know what to say. Performers nearby approached her too. That was beautiful. You made me emotional. You have a gift. She could barely believe they were talking to her. Her friend rushed over and wrapped her in a tight hug. I knew it. I knew you would move them. She felt her eyes sting, but she blinked the tears away. I can't believe they stood up, she whispered. You earned it, her friend said softly. After a few minutes, she found a quiet spot backstage and sat down with her instrument resting on her lap. The applause still echoed in her mind. She pressed a hand over her heart and breathed deeply. She thought of all the nights she played alone, never imagining anyone would hear her. She thought of all the fears that had kept her silent. Thought of what had just happened, how her music had filled a hall full of people and touched them. Behind her, she heard the next act begin, but her mind was still on the stage. She whispered to herself, I did it. She said it again, quietly, like a secret she was finally allowed to share. I really did it. Later in the evening, when The event ended. Audience members walked backstage to meet performers. She stayed near the corner, comfortable with too much attention, but also curious. To her surprise, several people approached her. An elderly woman held her hand gently. "Your music reminded me of my late husband." "Thank you," the teenager said. "I want to learn to play like you." "You inspired me." A couple told her, "We didn't expect something so emotional tonight. You touched our hearts." Each comment felt unreal. She struggled to respond, but nodded, smiled, and whispered small thank yous. Before leaving, the organizer came to her again with a thoughtful expression. "Have you ever considered performing more? Maybe joining a small group? Or teaching?" She shook her head quickly. "I've never done anything like this before," Willie said with a warm smile. "You should think about it. You have something special." She didn't know how to respond. The idea felt too big. Tanu, her friend, came back and held her arm gently. "Let's go home. You've had a big night." She nodded, still dazed. Outside, the cool night air brushed against her face. The sky was dark, dotted with stars. People were still talking excitedly as they walked to their cars, mentioning their favorite performances. She heard her name mentioned once. Her breath caught. Someone said, "That girl with the instrument." She was unbelievable. She looked down, her heart swelling. On the drive home, she leaned her head against the window, watching the streetlights pass. She felt tired, but a good kind of tired. Tired, filled with accomplishment. Her friend glanced at her with a smile. "You're quiet, I don't know how to explain it," she whispered. "You don't have to. You lived it." When she reached home, she placed her instrument gently on its stand. She sat on the edge of her bed for a long moment. Then she let out a deep breath. One that felt like it had been held inside her for years. For the first time. She didn't feel like someone who hid in the background. For the first time, she felt seen. She lay down and closed her eyes. Replaying the moment the audience stood up for her, that moment would stay in her heart forever. And though she didn't know what the future held, she knew one thing for certain. Stepping onto that stage had changed everything. The moment the hall lights dimmed, a calm silence fell over the room. It was the kind of silence that made every sound feel louder, even a simple breath. People settled into their seats, expecting another usual performance. Most of them had no idea who the quiet performer was. They had seen the name on the program, but didn't pay much attention. Some whispered, some checked their phones, and some were only waiting for the performers they knew. But no one expected what was about to happen. Behind the curtain, the performers stood with trembling hands. Their heartbeat felt like it was echoing inside their chest. The air backstage was warm and smelled faintly of dust from old curtains and wood from the stage floor. A man from the event team gave a small nod to signal that it was almost time. And even that simple gesture made the performer's stomach tighten. For a moment, the performer closed their eyes. They tried to steady their breath, focusing on the soft sound of their inhale and exhale. The fear was still there, but something else had begun to grow too. It wasn't confidence, not yet. It was simply the feeling that they had come too far to step back now. All the late night practice sessions rushed through their mind. The long hours sitting alone in an empty room, playing the same part again and again, correcting small mistakes, fighting frustration, fighting doubt. They remembered the nights when their hands would hurt from rehearsing too much. But they still continued because something inside told them this moment mattered. A voice from behind the curtain whispered that it was time. The performer took one slow breath, then stepped forward. The curtain moved slightly as they walked, and the soft fabric brushed against their shoulder. And then, suddenly, everything opened up. Bright lights flooded their vision. For a second, they couldn't see the audience at all. The lights were warm and strong, creating a glow around the stage. Then slowly, the crowd came into focus. Rows and rows of people sat watching, their faces waiting, some curious, some bored, some completely unaware of what was about to happen. The performer walked to the center of the stage. Their legs felt stiff, but they didn't stop. They adjusted the microphone stand or the instrument in their hands, making small movements to settle themselves. The sound of those little adjustments echoed through the hall, and whispers faded. The room grew still. The performer lifted their eyes and looked at the crowd. It was a short glance, but it was enough to make the nerves return in a rush. But then something small happened. A child in the front row smiled at them, a gentle, harmless smile. It didn't fix everything, but it softened the moment. It reminded the performer that people weren't there to judge. They were there to listen. The performer took another breath. Their fingers curled around the instrument or hovered above the necessary position. The microphone waited for the first sound. Everyone held their breath without realizing it, and then it began. The first note floated into the air, soft but steady. It filled the room with a sound that was simple, pure, and honest. The audience wasn't prepared for it. People who were whispering stopped mid-sentence. Someone who was half scrolling through their phone slowly lowered it. Even the event staff standing near the exit lifted their heads. The note carried emotion. More than the performer ever knew how to speak in words. That first sound was not just music hit, was something deeper. It was years of silence. Years of wanting to be seen. Years of holding back. Years of dreaming quietly. Then came the next note, and the next, and the next. Each one flowed into the air with more strength than the last. The performer could feel the shift inside themselves. At first, their hands felt stiff, but as they continued, the tension faded. Their body began to relax into the performance. They no longer felt like they were standing in front of hundreds of people. They felt like they were alone in a room, finally letting their hearts speak. The audience sat quietly, listening with full attention now. Their eyes widened as the performance grew richer. Some leaned forward. Some looked at each other in surprise. Even those who doubted the performer in the beginning found themselves unable to look away. A soft melody turned into something stronger. A gentle rhythm turned into something confident. The performer began to pour all the hidden parts of themselves into the performance, their fears, their hopes, their heartbreak, their small joys. Every sound carried a piece of their story. As the music or voice filled the room, the performer felt something shift inside. The fear that had lived so deeply in them slowly began to melt away. They felt almost weightless, as if the stage itself was supporting them. The lights no longer felt blinding, they felt warm, comforting. Almost like sunlight, the performer didn't notice the moment the audience stopped being an audience. They didn't notice when people stopped judging and started feeling. They didn't notice when the room turned from strangers into listeners who understood them without hearing a single spoken word. For the audience, the change was clear. A man in the second row felt his eyes sting with emotion, though he didn't know why. A woman who had been thinking about leaving early felt herself frozen in place. Even the young children, who often grew restless at events like this, sat still with wide eyes. The performer moved through the middle part of the piece with complete immersion. The notes rose higher, or the voice grew stronger, reaching places that only come from a deep, unseen courage. Every sound carried a truth, something real, something human. Someone in the back row whispered, not in doubt this time, but in awe, "Where did this come from?" Another person nodded slowly, unable to look away, as the performance neared its most powerful moment. The performer could feel a rush building inside. It was a feeling they had never experienced. It wasn't fear anymore, it was freedom. It was the moment they realized they didn't need to hide their talent. They didn't need to shrink themselves. They didn't need to stay in the background. They belonged right here, under the lights, doing the thing that made them feel alive. The final section of the performance was the most moving. The performer played or sang with everything inside them. Their heart raced, but not from fear. Their hands moved or their voice rose with complete certainty. It was as if something finally clicked. This was who they were meant to be. The audience felt it too. The room seemed to breathe with the music, rising and falling with each note. Even the quietest moments held power. People felt connected to the performer, even though many didn't know their name. And then the sound began to soften. The performance reached its last stretch. The performer took a tiny breath, preparing for the final note. It was a single moment that felt both long and short at the same time. The room went completely silent, so silent that it felt as if the entire world paused. When the final note, left the performer's hands or voice, it didn't just fill the room, it filled every heart that was listening. It hung in the air gently, almost like a whisper. It stayed there for a moment before slowly fading away. The performers stood still. They didn't move. They didn't look up. They simply waited, their chest rising and falling with soft breaths. Their hands trembled again, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from the overwhelming emotion of what they had just done. The room remained silent for one long second, as if everyone needed that moment to process what they had just witnessed. And that moment just before the applause was when the performer realized something. They had done it. They had given everything they had. They had allowed themselves to be seen, fully and honestly. The silence was ending. Something big was coming. But for now, the performer simply stood there, soaking in the feeling of a moment they would remember forever. The final note faded slowly into the air, almost as if it wanted to stay a little longer before letting go. The performer stood there still and quiet, feeling the soft vibration of that last sound inside their chest. The stage lights warmed their face, and for a moment, the whole world felt paused. They could hear their own breath, gentle and shaky, and they could feel the tremble in their fingers that had returned now that the performance was over, but the room was silent. Not a cough, not a whisper, not even the sound of someone shifting in their seat. It was as if the entire audience needed time to understand what they had just witnessed. The performer looked down at the floor for a few seconds, afraid to lift their eyes and see disappointment, or worse, indifference. Then it happened. A single person in the middle row stood up. The sound of their chair moving echoed through the hall like a spark. Then another person rose. Then another. And before the performer could even process what was happening, the entire room, every row, every seat, every person got to their feet. A wave of applause exploded through the hall. Hands clapped loudly, shouts of excitement filled the air, and some people even whistled out of pure joy. The performer lifted their heads slightly, unsure if this was actually happening, but it was real. People were cheering for them. The performer blinked hard, trying to take it in. Faces in the crowd were lit with big smiles. Some people looked amazed, others emotional. A few even wiped tears from their eyes. It was not the kind of polite applause people give at events. This was different. This was raw, honest admiration. The performer couldn't move at first. They were frozen, overwhelmed by the sight of the entire hall standing on their feet. It felt unreal, like a dream they had never allowed themselves to believe. Someone near the front shouted, "Incredible!" Another voice added, "Do it again!" And the applause grew even louder. The performer felt something warm rise inside them, spreading through their chest like a soft fire. For a long moment, they simply stood there, letting the cheers wash over them. It felt like every second was healing something inside. Every clap, every cheer, every shout. Years of doubt, years of silence, years of feeling small. All of it felt lighter. The performer gave a small bow, unsure of what else to do. The crowd roared even louder. Their face flushed, and they smiled a little. The kind of smile that comes from pure disbelief and happiness. Backstage, the event organizers peeked out, eyes wide. Some whispered to each other, surprised by the reaction. Even the volunteers who had earlier doubted the quiet performer were now standing taller, clapping proudly. When the applause finally began to soften only slightly, the performer walked off stage slowly, still stunned. The moment they stepped behind the curtain, the air felt cooler, but their heartbeats stayed fast. As soon as their feet touched the backstage floor, someone rushed forward and wrapped them in a tight, warm hug. It was a friend, breathless from excitement. "You did it," the friend whispered. "You really did it." The performer felt their throat tighten with emotion. They tried to speak but couldn't. Their eyes filled with tears, but not the kind that hurt. These were the kind that come from relief, from joy, from feeling seen. More people gathered around stagehands, volunteers, other performers. Some offered handshakes, others pats on the back, and some simply stared in admiration. That was unbelievable. One person said, You shocked the whole room, another added. A young performer who had gone earlier approached shyly. You inspired me, they said softly, eyes shining. I want to perform like that one day. Those words hit the performer deeply. They had never imagined they could inspire anyone. They had always been the quiet one, the unnoticed one, the person who blended into the background. And yet here they were, being looked at as someone worth admiring. The performer was guided to a small room backstage where they could rest. But rest was impossible. Their mind replayed the performance again and again. The silence before the applause, the standing ovation, the feeling of finally being seen, truly seen, after a few minutes. One of the event organizers knocked on the door and stepped inside. Everyone is asking for you, the organizer said with a wide smile. They want to meet you. They want to take photos. They want to know your story. The performer looked up, still dazed. Photos. With me. The organizer laughed. Yes, with you. You're the star of the night. The word star felt strange. It felt too big. But the performer didn't protest. They simply stood up slowly and followed the organizer back into the hallway. When they stepped out, the hallway was full of people waiting. Some held programs hoping for a signature. Others wanted to shake hands. A few simply wanted to say thank you. The performer moved through them gently, shy but smiling, offering small conversations and soft laughs. People said things like, I haven't heard something that beautiful in years. It made me feel something I can't explain. Your performance changed my whole night. Every comment felt unreal, but also incredibly meaningful. Later that night, when the crowd slowly left and the hall became quiet again, the performer walked out into the cool air outside the building. The night sky was clear and the world felt calm. They stood there for a moment, breathing deeply. Letting the cold air cool the heat on their face, they thought about the journey that had brought them here, the fears, the doubts, the lonely practice sessions. All the moments when they almost gave up. And now, standing outside the hall where hundreds of people had risen to their feet for them, they felt something they hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Not pride in the sense of showing off, but the quiet, gentle pride of someone who finally allowed themselves to believe in their own voice. A soft breeze brushed past them. They closed their eyes for a second. The sounds of the night felt peaceful, cars in the distance, faint laughter from people walking home, and the echo of applause still ringing in their memory for the first time in their life. The performer wasn't afraid of being seen. They weren't afraid of taking up space. They weren't afraid of sharing their talent with the world. They knew this night was just the beginning. Not because they expected fame or success, but because they had discovered something inside themselves, courage. The kind of courage that comes from facing fear and doing it anyway. The kind of courage that stays as they walked toward home. Their steps felt lighter. Every footstep felt like a small promise to themselves. A promise that they would never hide their gift again. A promise that they would keep growing, keep performing, keep sharing. A promise that they deserved to be heard. The night stretched out in front of them, full of new possibilities. They didn't know where this path would lead, but for once, they weren't worried. They had already done the hardest thing. They had stepped onto a stage. They had played their heart out, and they had brought an entire room to their feet. The performer smiled softly in the quiet night, and as they walked, they carried with them the memory of the applause, warm, loud, and unforgettable. It was a moment they would keep forever, a moment that changed everything.